All right, let's dive into a really fascinating puzzle. How does a single, divine message, something first heard in a desert cave, grow into this massive, comprehensive legal system that guides the lives of over 1 billion people today? I mean, that journey from revelation to rule, it's just an incredible story of faith, history, and some serious intellectual heavy lifting.
Yeah, that's really the question at the heart of it all, isn't it? How do you take a spiritual revelation and turn it into a practical, day-to-day legal system? The answer, as we're about to see, is this incredible story where divine guidance meets human intellect and honestly, just plain historical necessity.
Okay, so to really grasp the kind of revolution that Islam brought, we've got to step back in time. We need to understand the world it was born into. We're talking about pre-Islamic Arabia, a time that's often called the Ayam Jahiliyah, which literally translates to the age of ignorance.
So what did this world actually look like? Well, for starters, society was all about constant tribal warfare. Economically, believe it or not, idolatry was a huge business in Mecca. You had taxes collected for all these different gods. And socially, women had very few rights. They couldn't inherit property, and things like temporary marriages were a thing. Plus, financial practices like charging interest, or riba, were just common practice. This was the landscape, the social and legal backdrop that was about to be totally transformed.
And that transformation? It all began in the year 610 AD. Inside a cave on a mountain called Hira, the Prophet Muhammad received the very first of what would be many divine revelations. This was the beginning of a whole new blueprint for society.
Now think about this for a second. The very first word revealed to him, it wasn't pray, it wasn't believe or submit, it was iqra, which means read, or, more broadly, seek knowledge. That one single command, right from the get-go, set the tone for a faith that was going to place a massive emphasis on intellect and understanding from its very first moment. Of course, these revelations didn't all come at once. It wasn't like a book just dropped out of the sky, no. This unfolded over 23 years and in 2 really distinct phases. The early verses, the ones from Mecca, they were all about the why, the core beliefs, right? The unity of God, moral duties, the afterlife, the big picture stuff. But then, after the community moved to Medina, the focus of the verses shifted. It became about the how. How do you actually build a society? So you start getting practical rules on everything from civil and criminal law to military and family law. So after the Prophet's death in 632, the brand new Muslim community faced this absolutely monumental challenge. The divine message, the entire revelation, existed mostly in the memories of his followers. The big question was, how on earth do you make sure it's preserved perfectly forever? Well, the solution ended up being a multi-stage process. Initially, you had these expert memorizers, the Hafaz, who had committed the entire thing to memory. But tragically, many of them were killed in battle. This was a crisis, so the first caliph, Abu Bakr, commissioned the first complete written version, around 633. But the real game-changing moment came about 20 years later under the third caliph, Uthman. He's the one who standardized the text, creating official copies to be sent out all across the expanding empire. This made sure there was one single, unified version for everyone, for all time.
Okay, so now the divine blueprint, the Quran, is preserved and standardized. The text is safe. So what's next? Well, the next great intellectual project kicks off. How do we develop consistent ways to interpret this text and actually apply it to everyday life?
And this leads to a really, really important question. I mean, if there's only one Quran, why are there different schools of Islamic law, these madhahib? It seems a little confusing, right? Well, the answer comes down to one thing: the human process of interpretation. So over the next few centuries, you see the rise of 4 major Sunni schools of thought, each founded by an absolutely brilliant legal scholar. Now, what's crucial to understand is that they were all working from the same primary sources. The difference was in their methodology. They each developed a distinct interpretive method, kind of like a unique toolkit for legal reasoning. So for instance, the Hanafi school really emphasized this idea of juristic equity, istihsan. The Hanbali school, on the other hand, was super strict about sticking to the sources and would only use independent opinion, or rai, when it was absolutely necessary. And these weren't rival groups fighting each other. They were respected, scholarly traditions with just different ways of approaching the same problems.
All right, this brings us to what is maybe the most critical distinction for understanding Islamic law today. It's about 2 words that get confused all the time: sharia and fiqh. And let me be clear, they are not the same thing.
The best way to get your head around this is with an analogy. Think of Sharia as the path. It's the divine, eternal, unchanging law laid down by God. It is the law itself. Fiqh, on the other hand, is the map. It's the human attempt to understand and chart that divine path. It's the knowledge of the law built up by centuries of scholarly effort. So the path is perfect and eternal. The map? That's a product of human intellect. It's brilliant, it's essential, but it's always open to interpretation and even revision.
So that's the big question, right? How does the map get updated for new terrain? Well, it's through a process called ijtihad. You can think of this as the intense intellectual struggle, the deep analytical reasoning that a qualified scholar goes through to figure out legal rulings for new situations. This, right here, is the dynamic engine of legal evolution in Islam.
Now, the other side of that coin, the complementary concept to ijtihad, is something called taqlid. This is basically the act of following the established legal rulings of a previous authority or an existing school of law. It represents the importance of sticking to precedent, of respecting the accumulated wisdom of generations of scholars. And really, any healthy legal system needs both, right? It needs that dynamic engine of ijtihad and the stability of taqlid.
And that, right there, is the living, breathing heart of this whole tradition. It's this constant dialogue between a fixed divine text and the messy, ever-changing reality of human life. That intellectual struggle to interpret the eternal path while trying to draw a map for the modern world, that continues to this very day. And it leaves us with that huge essential question. As the world keeps changing, how does a 1400-year-old legal tradition continue to evolve?